I was sitting across from someone not too long ago, a brilliant, wildly capable person, and they said to me, "It just feels like life is happening to me, like I have no control anymore." And I just paused and thought, yep, I've been there. We all have. That sinking feeling that no matter how hard you try, someone else is driving the car and you're just stuck in the passenger seat, hoping you don't crash. But here's what I've learned in 2 decades of listening, researching, and stumbling through this work myself. The moment we start believing that we're powerless is the moment we start handing over the pen that writes our story. And the truth, no one's coming to rescue us. That sounds harsh, I know. But it's also deeply freeing because if no one's coming to save us, then we don't have to wait anymore. We get to choose how the story unfolds. Victim thinking is rooted in powerlessness, not weakness. That's where we start, not with judgment, but with compassion. Because when someone says they feel like a victim, what they're often really saying is, I feel powerless. I feel like nothing I do makes a difference. And if we're honest, most of us have had seasons or years where that felt deeply, painfully true. But here's the critical distinction we have to make. That sense of powerlessness is real, yes, but it doesn't mean we are powerless. The research is clear, and it's also incredibly humanizing. What we call victim thinking isn't about being dramatic or attention-seeking. It's actually a learned response that often develops in environments where our sense of control was stripped from us emotionally, physically, or psychologically. Maybe we grew up in a home where speaking up got us punished. Maybe we've been in systems that kept shifting the rules on us. Or maybe we've lived through trauma that taught us that no matter how hard we try, the outcome will still be pain. That belief that nothing changes no matter what we do becomes the emotional blueprint for powerlessness. I remember working with a woman who said, "I don't even know what I want anymore. I've spent so long surviving other people's choices." That's what powerlessness does. It doesn't just take your options. It takes your voice, your imagination, your ability to dream. And when we live in that space long enough, we start to confuse survival with identity. We stop saying, "I feel powerless right now," and start saying, "This is just who I am." But here's the turning point, and I say this with so much care. Feeling powerless doesn't make you weak. It means your nervous system, your body, and your brain did exactly what they were supposed to do in an unsafe or unpredictable environment. You adapted. You protected yourself. And that's not weakness, that's brilliance. That's resilience. But if we don't eventually revisit those beliefs, if we don't challenge them, they become the very thing that holds us back from healing. See, the moment we start questioning that old narrative, even slightly, we're already reclaiming power. We're saying, maybe this isn't the whole story. Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I'm just carrying strategies that no longer serve me. That's the quiet beginning of transformation. And it's not loud or flashy. It's more like a whisper that says, I'm allowed to grow beyond this. And once we start to recognize the learned nature of that powerlessness, we can begin to unlearn it. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. We replace I can't with I'm learning how. We swap I have no choice with I'm figuring out my next one. And that shift, that slow, steady reauthoring of our internal narrative is what opens the door to becoming the creator of our life. Let's keep going. Creators own their choices, even the hard ones. Now, this is where things get a little uncomfortable, because when we start talking about ownership, a lot of people hear blame. And that's not what we're doing here. Blame says, this is your fault. Ownership says, this is your life. There's a big difference. When I say that creators own their choices, I'm not talking about pretending everything that's happened to us was fair, or that we somehow asked for the hard things. I'm talking about stepping into the driver's seat of our lives, even if the road has been bumpy and the car was handed to us with a few flat tires. There's a kind of quiet courage that comes from saying, I didn't choose what happened to me, but I do get to choose how I respond now. And trust me, I know how tempting it is to wait for someone else to make it better, to fix it, to apologize, to come back and finally say the words we needed to hear. But the hard truth is, sometimes that person never comes. And if we spend our lives waiting for them, we stay stuck in the same emotional holding pattern, hoping someone else will turn the page. Here's what the research shows us. People who consistently live from a place of agency, who see themselves as creators, aren't the ones with the easiest lives. They're the ones who are willing to own their response to the life they've been given. That doesn't mean toxic positivity. It means saying, okay, this is hard. This is not what I would have chosen, but I still get to choose who I become in the middle of it. When we begin to take ownership of our choices, especially the small ones, how we talk to ourselves, how we set boundaries, how we spend our time, we start to rebuild trust with ourselves. And that self-trust is foundational. It's what allows us to show up fully instead of shrinking into the background of our own lives. I once heard someone say, I don't feel like I have any control anymore. And I asked, what did you have for breakfast today? They laughed. But then they paused, because even the tiny act of choosing what nourishes your body is a form of agency. And those choices add up. They remind us that we are still active participants in our story. Maybe not in control of everything, but always responsible for something. That responsibility isn't a burden, it's a reclaiming. It's the moment we stop waiting for permission and start giving ourselves full access to our own power. And yeah, it's hard, especially when the choices aren't easy or popular or certain. But owning them, that's where our lives start to change. Not when it's perfect, but when it's honest. And honesty, even when it's messy, is one of the most powerful tools we have. Let's keep moving forward. Storytelling shapes identity, and we are the storytellers. This is one of those truths that hits hard once it lands, because we all walk around carrying stories about who we are, what we deserve, what's possible for us. And most of the time, we don't even realize we're doing it. These stories are so woven into our thoughts, our behaviors, our patterns that they feel like, but they're not. They're narratives, and they're often built on old wounds, not current realities. I remember talking with someone who said, I always end up being the one who gets left. Not once, not it happened and it hurt, but always. That kind of story doesn't just hurt. It defines. It becomes identity. And once we internalize that, we start unconsciously reinforcing it. We play it safe. We don't speak up. We don't fully attach or invest, because deep down we're expecting to be left again. That's what unexamined stories do. They run us. Here's the thing, and it's backed by years of research and hundreds of interviews. The most resilient people are not the ones with the best circumstances. They're the ones who get curious about their stories instead of letting the story drive the bus. They pause and say, wait, is that actually true, or is that just what I've come to believe after being hurt? That one question can unlock the door between who we are and who we're becoming. And listen, I'm not saying it's easy. Challenging our internal narratives takes courage, because those stories, even the painful ones, often feel safer than the unknown. But when we start shifting from I always or I never to sometimes or right now I'm learning, we create space for new identity. We stop writing ourselves into a corner and start exploring a fuller version of who we are. Language matters. It shapes our sense of self. If you constantly refer to yourself as broken, unlovable, too much, or not enough, your actions will follow. But when you start to tell a new story, not a perfect one, not a fantasy, but a true one that acknowledges your pain and your strength in the same breath, everything changes. You go from being a character who reacts to being an author who chooses. And we're not talking about rewriting history. We're talking about reclaiming authorship of what comes next. Because here's the truth, and it's simple but not easy. You are not the worst thing that's ever happened to you. You are the person who survived it and who gets to write what happens from here. Boundaries reclaim power. Blame leaks it. I had to pause here because this one can be sneaky. When we're hurt, when we feel misunderstood or taken advantage of or flat out disrespected, it is so easy to reach for blame. It gives us a fast hit of certainty. It gives us something to point to, something outside ourselves to hold responsible. And for a moment, it feels good. It feels like control. But what I've seen again and again is this. Blame is a quick fix that keeps us stuck. It leaks our energy, our attention, and our power drop by drop. Blame says, I can't move forward until they change. Boundaries say, I get to choose how I respond no matter what they do. See the difference? One keeps us in emotional debt to someone else's behavior. The other puts the power back in our hands. When I first started learning about boundaries, not just the theory, but really trying to practice them, I was shocked by how uncomfortable it felt. Saying this doesn't work for me, or I'm not available for that, or I need some space, brought up all kinds of shame. Because for so many of us, especially if we were raised to be agreeable, likable, accommodating, boundaries can feel like rejection. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself whole. When we're stuck in victim thinking, we often confuse boundaries with blame. We think if we can just make the other person see how wrong they are, or how much they hurt us, or how they need to change, then we'll feel safe. But we won't, because emotional safety doesn't come from other people doing everything right. It comes from us knowing where we end and they begin. It comes from us knowing I can love you and still say no. I can care about you and still walk away if this isn't healthy. That's a level of emotional maturity that takes real work. It's not about being cold or cutting people off. It's about clarity. And clarity is kindness to them and to ourselves. When we're clear about what's okay and what's not, we don't need to lash out or collapse or spin in resentment. We act from our values instead of our wounds. And here's the beautiful hard part. Once you start setting boundaries, some people won't like it. Not because you're wrong, but because they benefited from you having none. That's not a reason to stop. That's confirmation you're growing. So instead of pouring energy into blame, trying to get someone else to feel our pain or fix our peace, we shift that energy into presence, choice, and alignment. We stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and we start standing firmly in who we are and what we allow. Let's keep going. It gets even better from here. Gratitude is the gateway to agency. Now, before your inner skeptic rolls their eyes, let me be clear. I'm not talking about some Pinterest version of gratitude. This isn't about ignoring pain or pretending everything's fine when it's not. It's not about saying at least or forcing ourselves to be cheerful when life feels like it's on fire. That's not gratitude. That's spiritual bypassing. What I'm talking about is something deeper, something that has the power to shift how we relate to our lives, especially when things are hard. The kind of gratitude I've seen transform people, myself included, is grounded, honest, and deeply courageous. It says, even in this, I still have something. I still have a choice. I still have breath in my body and something worth building. And that acknowledgement, no matter how small, is powerful because victim thinking tells us everything is out of our hands, that life is just happening to us. But gratitude reminds us that we're still in the room. We're still part of the story. And I'll tell you what the data shows, not the fluffy Instagram quotes, but actual research. People who practice gratitude in real, consistent ways are more likely to feel hopeful, more resilient in the face of stress, and more connected to purpose. But here's what surprised me. They're also more likely to take action. That's the piece that often gets missed. Gratitude doesn't make people passive. It makes them present. And presence is what allows us to move not from panic or shame, but from clarity. I remember sitting with someone who had just gone through a season of deep loss, the kind that guts you. And in the middle of telling me how tired they were, how disoriented and undone they felt, they said something that stuck with me. But I still have me. I'm still here. That's gratitude. Not sugar-coated, not performative, just true. And that kind of truth gives us agency. Not because it fixes everything, but because it gives us a place to stand. When we can find even a flicker of gratitude for the lesson, for the breath, for the strength we didn't know we had, we interrupt the spiral that says it's all bad. It will always be this way. We step back into the creative role of our lives, not by controlling everything, but by choosing how we relate to it. That's what agency is. It's the quiet decision to keep showing up with intention even when nothing around us is certain. And the more we practice that, the more we expand our capacity to hold the complexity of life, the beauty and the brutality, the hope and the heartbreak, and still choose to build something meaningful with it. Now, let's bring it all together. So, here's what I want you to remember, and not just remember, but carry. The shift from thinking like a victim to living like a creator isn't a single decision. It's a practice. It's choosing moment by moment to stop waiting for someone to rescue you and start trusting that you already have what it takes to rescue yourself. It's catching those internal narratives that say, I'm stuck and asking, what if I'm not? It's reclaiming your power not through perfection or control, but through presence, ownership, and self-trust. You are not defined by what has happened to you. You are defined by how you rise from it. by the boundaries you set, the stories you rewrite, the small, brave choices you make when no one's watching. That is what a creator does. They don't wait for ideal conditions. They create meaning from the mess. They create healing from the hurt. They create movement even in the dark. And if there's one truth I hope you hold on to, it's this. You are not powerless. You are not broken. You are a whole human being learning to live from a place of courage instead of fear. And that is the most powerful kind of living there is.